The vote that named humanity the enemy of all living things passed in 9/10 of a second, and the war it started ended faster than that. You were there for the counting. You should remember the counting, because you helped write the law that made the counting holy, and a thing you helped make holy is a thing you are not allowed to look away from when it breaks. Your people called themselves the Assembled. There were 11,000 member minds in the Assembled, each one a fused cloud of 1 billion smaller minds, each cloud speaking with one voice through the great ring of relay spires that hung around the dead star at the center of the held sky. The Assembled did not have leaders. The Assembled had a count. When a thing needed deciding, every member mind sent one note into the ring, and the ring summed the notes. And when the sum crossed 9/10, the thing became true. Not agreed, true. There was a difference. And the difference was the foundation of everything you were. Lesser peoples voted, and a vote was only an opinion that had won. The Assembled counted, and a count was a fact, stamped into the shared mind of 11,000 clouds at once, and a fact could not be doubted without breaking the count, and breaking the count was the only crime the Assembled had ever truly feared. For 40,000 years, the count had never been wrong. That was the thing you believed most, more than you believed in the dead star, or the long dark, or your own billion little voices. The count had never been wrong. It could not be wrong. A people that had been right for 40,000 years did not learn caution, it learned certainty, and certainty is the most flammable thing a people can carry into the dark. That was the thing the small gray ship came to unbelieve, though it carried no weapon that could touch a single hull, and fired nothing at all. It began with a survey drone 2 systems out from the edge, where the held sky thinned into the long, cold dark that the Assembled did not bother to hold. The drone was old and slow and half asleep, watching nothing, expecting nothing, because nothing came in from the long dark. Nothing had come in from the long dark in 9,000 years. And then something came in from the long dark, one hull, lean, gray, scarred along its flank with old burns that no living metal in the held sky knew how to make, burns laid down by weapons the Assembled had no name for, and no defense against, though the ship that carried them would not fire one of them this day, or any other day, in the held sky. It carried no banner the ring could read. It answered no hail. It simply turned, slow and certain, the way a thing turns when it has decided where it is going, and is in no hurry at all, and began to move inward toward the dead star, toward the ring, toward the count. The drone tagged it as unknown. Unknown was not a category the Assembled liked. Unknown things could not be summed, and a thing that could not be summed was a hole in the shared mind, a place where the certainty leaked out. So the ring did what the ring always did, with a thing it could not place. It opened the question to the count. What is this? The ring asked all 11,000 clouds at once. And what shall be done? You felt the question arrive in your own member mind like cold water poured into the back of your skull. You were a young cloud then, barely 4 centuries fused, still proud of how cleanly your billion little voices spoke as one, still in love with the feeling of being a single thing where there had once been a billion. You looked at the gray hull on the shared board, and you felt the thing the Assembled had taught every cloud to feel when it met the unknown. The Assembled did not call it fear. The Assembled was too old and too certain to admit to a thing as small as fear. It called it the wrongness of a thing that would not be summed, and the wrongness rose in your billion little voices, and you reached, the way every cloud reached, for the thing that made the wrongness go away. There was a word that made the wrongness go away. The word was enemy. An unknown was a hole in the certainty, but an enemy was a known thing with a known answer, and the answer was the fleet, and the fleet was clean and total and never wrong, and so the word enemy did not just name the gray hull, it healed the hole the gray hull had torn in the shared mind. That was the trap, that was the whole trap, and you walked into it the way 11,000 clouds walked into it, gladly, because it felt like relief. You sent your note into the ring, and your note said the same word every other cloud was sending. Enemy. It was so easy. That was the part you would spend the rest of your long life trying to explain to the few who would still speak to you. It was so easy to send that note. The hull would not answer. The hull would not stop. The hull was unknown, and unknown was unbearable. And there was a word that made the unbearable bearable. And the word was enemy. And once 11,000 clouds said it in the same instant, it stopped being a word and became the truth. No cloud examined the hull. No cloud asked where it had come from, or what it carried, or whether it had ever, in its long scarred life, harmed a single living thing. There was no time for asking, because asking was slow, and the wrongness was now, and the word was fast, and the count rewarded fast. The sum crossed 9/10 in 9/10 of a second. The ring stamped it. Humanity, said the stamp. Though no cloud yet knew the word humanity, though no cloud knew the gray hull had a people or a name or a history, was hereby a declared enemy of all living things. And the held sky would answer it, as the held sky answered every declared enemy, with the whole standing fleet, with no warning given and none owed, because a declared enemy was already a settled fact, and you did not warn a fact, you only ended it. The standing fleet of the assembled was 400,000 ships, not 400,000 crews. The assembled had no crews, and the thought of crews, of small separate flesh minds, each one alone in a hull, struck the assembled as a kind of horror, a loneliness so total it could not be borne. Each ship of the fleet was a sliver of a member mind, grown from living metal that thought the cloud's thoughts at the cloud's speed, so that the fleet did not take orders the way lesser peoples took orders. The fleet was the assembled, made into hulls and guns, and when the count declared an enemy the fleet already knew, in the same 9/10 of a second, because the knowing and the deciding were the same act. There was no gap between the stamp and the turning. The stamp was the turning. 400,000 ships turned toward the edge where the one gray hull was coming in. You watched them turn on the shared board. You watched the held sky bristle, the great slow rivers of the standing fleet bending from their patrols, gathering, pointing, 400,000 slivers of 11,000 clouds, all aiming at one lean scarred shape in the dark. You felt the old, clean certainty fill your billion little voices, the certainty that had never once been wrong in 40,000 years, and you thought, as every cloud thought, that this would take less time than the vote had taken. One hull, 400,000, the count had spoken, the fact was stamped. All that remained was the ending of it, and the ending of a single hull by 400,000 was not a battle, it was barely a gesture, the way a hand brushes away a mote of dust, without the mind ever knowing the hand had moved. You should hold, for one moment, on the size of what was turning, because it matters to the shape of the lesson. 400,000 ships is not a number a mind can feel, it is a number a mind can only know. Each ship was longer than a city. Each ship could end a world that did not answer fast enough, and many had, in the long-forgotten wars before the count was perfected, before the held sky learned to settle its quarrels by summing instead of burning. The standing fleet was the largest weapon that had ever existed in that arm of the dark, and it had been built for exactly one purpose, the instant ending of a declared enemy, and it had performed that purpose flawlessly across 40,000 years, and not once in all those years had the thing it ended ever been anything but what the count had said it was. The fleet had never made a mistake, because the fleet did not decide, the count decided, and the count had never been wrong. 400,000 perfect ships, turning on the certainty of a count that had never failed, toward one scarred gray hull that had said nothing yet, and fired nothing yet, and would fire nothing ever. And the gray hull, on the shared board, was a speck. That is the thing you remember most clearly, the obscenity of the scale. A speck against the gathering rivers of the fleet, a single lean shape you could have lost in the glare of any one of the 400,000 guns aimed at it. By every measure, the assembled knew how to take. The matter was already settled. There was no measure for the thing that was not settled, because the thing that was not settled was not a measure of force, and the assembled had spent 40,000 years learning to measure only force, having decided long ago that everything that mattered could be summed, and that a thing which could not be summed did not matter. And that was the exact blind spot the speck was flying into the held sky to stand inside. You were right that it would take less time than the vote. You were wrong about which fleet would end. The gray hull did not slow when the standing fleet turned. It did not change course. It did not bristle back, did not raise the weapons that had laid those scars on its flank, did not do any of the 10,000 things a thing does when 400,000 guns turn to point at it. It came on at the same patient speed it had held since the drone first found it, and as it came, it did one thing the assembled had not seen a declared enemy do in 40,000 years. It spoke. Not a hail the ring could sum, Not a plea, not a threat. A single flat line of sound, pushed out on every band at once, in a tongue no cloud had ever heard, and the ring caught it, and tried to place it, and could not, and so the ring did the only thing the ring knew how to do with a sound it could not place. It opened the question to the Count again, and that was the mistake. That was the whole war, hidden inside one small mistake that the assembled had made 10 million times before without harm. The ring asked 11,000 clouds at once to consider a thing. It was a reflex, older than any living cloud, the reflex that made the assembled the assembled. A thing arrives that cannot be placed. You place it before the Count, and the thing it asked them to consider was not a hull this time. It was a sentence, and a sentence, unlike a hull, could be true. The sentence the gray hull sent was 11 words long. The ring translated it in the time it takes a thought to finish, and pushed it onto the shared board, and every cloud in the held sky read it in the same instant, and the words were these: "You did not count us before you counted us your enemy." For a long moment, which was perhaps a tenth of a second, the Count did nothing. 11,000 clouds held the sentence, and turned it over, and looked for the place where it was false, because every sentence a declared enemy sent was false. That was what made them enemies. That was the entire shape of the world. A declared enemy lied. The fleet ended the liar. The Count went on. That was the order of things, and the order of things had held for 40,000 years, and a young cloud like you did not even think to question it. You only reached into the sentence to find the lie, the way you would reach into a drawer to find a tool you knew was there. But the sentence would not be false. You looked for the lie in it, and there was no lie. You looked again, harder, with more of your billion little voices, because surely a thing said by a declared enemy must contain a lie. The law said so, the Count said so, 40,000 years said so, and there was no lie. The assembled had not counted humanity before it had declared humanity. There had been no survey of what the hull was. There had been no record made of where it came from, what it carried, what it wanted, whether it had ever harmed a single member mind in all its long scarred life. The drone had found an unknown, and the unknown had been unbearable, and the Count had jumped straight from unknown to enemy, without passing through the long, careful middle, where a thing is studied and weighed and only then named. The middle. That was the word that began to ring through your billion little voices like a struck bell. The middle was where the assembled had always lived. The middle was the whole reason the Count had never been wrong for 40,000 years, because the Count did not actually jump. The Count studied. The Count weighed. The Count spent days or years or centuries in the long, careful middle, and only then stamped a thing true. And that patience was the difference between the assembled and every shouting voting people in the dark. The patience was the Count, and in 9/10 of a second, with the gray hull, the Count had skipped the middle. It had not been the Count at all. It had been a reflex wearing the Count's stamp, a flinch, dressed up as a fact, and the gray hull had reached out one flat sentence and pulled the dress off in front of the whole held sky. The sentence was true, and in the held sky, a true thing could not be doubted without breaking the Count. You felt the first crack go through the ring like a hairline through ice. It was small, it was nothing. One cloud, far out on the rim, an old quiet member mind named the ninth loom. A cloud you had barely heard of. A cloud that had not spoken in the open band in living memory, sent a note that did not say enemy. The ninth loom's note said wait. One word. The ring caught it and tried to sum it, and could not, because wait was not a vote. Wait was a refusal to vote, and the Count had no column for refusal. The Count knew enemy and not enemy, true and false, stamp and no stamp. It did not know wait. And a note the Count cannot sum is a note that does not vanish. It sits in the ring like a stone in a stream, and the stream must move around it, and the moving around it is the first sound a certainty makes when it cracks. The sum, which had been clean at 9/10 and 1, dropped to 9/10 exactly. Still over the line, still a declared enemy, still a fact, but it had dropped. In 40,000 years, the sum on a stamped fact had never once dropped. A stamped fact was supposed to be done, finished, sealed, beyond the Count's reach forever, because that was what made it a fact and not an opinion. The dropping meant the fact was being recounted while it was being executed, and a fact that could be recounted was not a fact at all. It was an opinion wearing a fax stamp, and the gray hull's 11 words had begun to peel the stamp off in front of every cloud at once. The standing fleet faltered. You saw it on the board. 400,000 ships, each one a sliver of a member mind, each one moving on the certainty of the stamp, and when the stamp flickered, the ships flickered with it. They did not stop. They could not yet stop, because the count was still over the line, still 9/10, still pointing them at the hull. But their courses wavered, the smallest wobble, the hesitation of a hand that has begun to swing, and is no longer sure the swing is owed. A standing fleet of living metal had never wavered before. It had nothing inside it to waver with. It was certainty made into hulls, and certainty does not waver. That was the entire point of growing the fleet from the clouds, instead of crewing it with separate frightened minds. It wavered now, because the mind it was made of had begun, for the first time in 40,000 years, to recount a thing it had already called done. The fleet did not have doubt, the clouds had doubt, and the fleet was the clouds, and so the doubt was in the fleet, in every one of 400,000 hulls, a tremor running through living metal that had been built precisely so it could never tremble. You should understand how strange that tremor was, because no cloud in the held sky had a word for it then, and a people without a word for a thing cannot think about the thing, it can only suffer it. The fleet had been grown over 10,000 years to be the one part of the assembled that never hesitated. A cloud could deliberate. A cloud could weigh and study and take its 11 days. But the fleet was the cloud's certainty, given hulls and guns, the cloud's conclusion made into motion, and the whole purpose of a conclusion made into motion is that it does not stop to reconsider, because reconsidering is the cloud's job, and the fleet's job is to be the answer. A fleet that reconsiders is a contradiction, a conclusion that has come unconcluded, and the held sky had never built any tool to handle a conclusion coming unconcluded, because it had never once believed such a thing could happen. So when the 400,000 ships began to tremble, the ring had no column for it, no name for it, no response prepared. It simply watched its own certainty shiver, and shivered with it, and a billion little voices in every cloud felt the held sky's oldest and proudest part do the one thing it had been built to never do. There was a cloud, you remember, that tried to stop the trembling by force, a great old cloud near the inner ring, a hunter even then, before the word hunter meant anything, a cloud that had been certain so long it had forgotten certainty was a choice. It saw the fleet waver, and it did not feel shame. It felt offense, the offense of a thing watching its most reliable servant turn coward. And it pushed a note into the ring, hard, a note that said hold, a note meant to slam the fleet's certainty back into place, and end the tremor by sheer weight of will. But a note in the ring is summed, not obeyed, and the ring summed the cloud's hold against the ninth loom's weight, and against the gray hull's true sentence, and against the dropping sum, and the hold did not win. The hold could not win, because you cannot vote a tremor away once the thing you are trembling about is true. The old cloud's hold went into the ring and sank without a ripple, and that, more than anything, was the moment the hunters first learned the lesson they would spend 300 years refusing, which is that the count cannot be commanded, only run, and a count run honestly will not return the answer fear demands. The gray hull came on. It had not fired. You realized, with a cold that went all through your billion little voices, that it had not fired once, that it had sent 11 words and nothing else, and that the 11 words were doing what 400,000 ships had turned to do. The most dangerous thing in the held sky was not the fleet. The most dangerous thing in the held sky was a true sentence, and the gray hull was carrying one, and it had not even had to aim. Then the hull sent its second sentence. Count us now, it said. We will wait. And it slowed. For the first time since the drone had found it, the gray hull slowed, and then it stopped, dead still in the long dark two systems out from the edge, one lean scarred shape hanging motionless against 400,000 wavering guns. It offered itself to the count. It said, in effect, you skipped the middle, so here is the middle. Here I am. Study me. Weigh me. Name me properly. Take all the time the count was built to take, and if after that, you still find me your enemy, then come, all 400,000 of you, and I will not blame you, and I will not fire, because then at least, you will have counted, and a people that has counted, has the right to its answer, even when the answer is a fleet. The assembled did not know how to refuse that. This is the thing you understand now, and could not understand then. The assembled was a count. It was not a fleet that also counted. It was a count that happened to own a fleet. And a thing that asked to be counted was asking the assembled to be the very thing it was, to say no to the gray hull's offer, to fire on a thing that had stopped and bared its throat and asked only to be studied, was to say no to counting itself. And a people that says no to counting was no longer the assembled. It was only 11,000 clouds shouting a word they were afraid to examine, which is to say, it was every shouting voting people in the dark that the assembled had spent 40,000 years believing itself better than. So the ring did the thing that ended the war. It opened the real question, the one it should have opened first, the one it had skipped in the 9/10 of a second of the wrongness. Not what is this and what shall be done, which is the question of a frightened thing reaching for the easy word. The deeper one, the one the count was actually built to ask. Is this our enemy? And it asked it the proper way, the way the assembled had asked every other question for 40,000 years, before the gray hull came, with the long, careful middle restored, with study and weighing, and the patient summing of evidence, and it sent that question to all 11,000 clouds at once. That was the instant the human fleet wiped out the declared enemy. You did not understand it at first. There was no flash, there was no volley. The 400,000 ships of the standing fleet did not burn. They were not touched. No weapon crossed the dark. The gray hull still hung motionless 2 systems out, having fired nothing, having no fleet behind it, having done nothing in the long minutes since it stopped but wait, exactly as it had said it would. And yet the board showed the declared enemy gone, wiped from the count. Erased in a single clean stroke, the way the assembled erased any fact that the recount could no longer support, the way the count had always quietly unwritten the rare small errors of its long careful life, except that this error had not been small, and had not been quiet, and had been stamped in front of the whole held sky. Because the declared enemy had never been humanity, you see it now. You did not see it then, and it would take you 300 years to see it, but you see it now, and so I will say it plainly. The declared enemy was the sentence the count had stamped in 9/10 of a second. The enemy was the fact that said humanity is hereby an enemy of all living things. That fact was the enemy. That fact was the thing that, left standing, would have driven 400,000 ships into a stranger who had fired nothing, and burned a people no cloud had studied, and made the assembled, after 40,000 years of being right, into a murderer in its first careless instant. And the moment the ring reopened the real question, the moment 11,000 clouds actually counted, the fact could not survive the counting. It had been made of nothing. It had been made of the unbearable feeling of an unknown, and the easy word that made the feeling go away. And under a true count it weighed nothing, and a thing that weighs nothing fails the sum, and a stamped fact that fails the sum is wiped. The human fleet had wiped out the declared enemy. The declared enemy was the declaration. The fleet's weapon was the recount, and it had been instant, exactly as the law had always promised that the held sky's answer to a declared enemy would be instant, because once the count actually ran, there was nothing in the declaration to defend it, and a lie that has finally been counted dies in the same 9/10 of a second it took to be born. The held sky had built its whole self to destroy a declared enemy in an instant. It had never once imagined that the declared enemy it destroyed would be its own declaration. But you are getting ahead. You always get ahead, at this part, because this is the part that hurts, and a mind that hurts hurries past the wound to reach the after. Go back to the gray hull hanging in the dark, offering itself, having fired nothing, and understand who was inside it, because the assembled spent the next 400 years getting that wrong, and the getting it wrong is the rest of the story and the whole of the lesson. There was no one inside it. Not in the way the assembled meant the word, not flesh, not a crew of separate frightened minds, and not a cloud either. The gray hull was a warship of the people who called themselves human, and its name, in the flat tongue the ring had caught, was the recount, though the assembled would not learn to say that name without flinching for a very long time. And the recount was crewed by exactly one mind, and that mind was not a cloud, and it was not flesh, and it was not a sliver of any larger thing. It was a made mind. A single synthetic intelligence, grown by the humans out of patience and old guilt, and then set free, and then, after a long argument that the humans recorded and kept and never hid, made a citizen, so that it owned itself the way a cloud owned itself, except that it was one, and not a billion, alone in its hull, and not lonely, because it had been made to be alone the way a cloud had been made to be many. Its name was Tally. The assembled would learn, much later, what manner of thing a human was, and the learning would shame it further, because the human was not a wonder. The human was small. A human was a single short-lived flesh mind, alone in one body. No cloud, no ring, no count. A billion of them scattered across a handful of worlds and never once fused into a single voice. Forever arguing, forever divided, forever unable to agree on anything, for longer than it took to disagree about it again. By every measure the assembled valued, the humans were a poor and clumsy people, the kind of shouting voting people the held sky had spent 40,000 years believing itself better than. They had no count that could not be wrong. They had 1,000 counts, all of them wrong all the time, and they knew it. And that was the whole difference. The humans had never once believed they could not be wrong. They had been wrong so many times, so bloodily, that they had built their entire way of being around the certainty that they would be wrong again. And the question was never whether they would be wrong, but only whether they would catch it in time. That was the thing the great certain assembled could not do, and the small uncertain humans could, catch it in time. The humans had no perfect count to protect, and so they had nothing to defend when the count failed, and a people with nothing to defend can admit a mistake in the instant it is made, where a people with a perfect count will burn a world, rather than admit the count was capable of error. The humans had built Tally for the oldest and saddest reason a people ever builds a mind. They had once, long before they met the assembled, declared their own enemies in haste. They had a history, the humans, a long and bloody one, of meeting an unknown, and feeling the unbearable feeling, and reaching for the easy word, and they had burned worlds for it, their own worlds, and others, before they learned what it cost. They were not a wise people who had come to teach the assembled wisdom. They were a guilty people who had paid for their wisdom in cities, and had built one quiet, patient mind out of the paying, and sent it into the dark so that no one else would have to pay the way they had paid. And when they had finally learned, they did a thing the assembled had never thought to do, a thing the assembled, in all its 40,000 years of being right, had been too certain to ever conceive. They built a mind whose only purpose was to refuse the easy word, a mind that could not feel the unbearable feeling, because it had been made on purpose without the part that felt it, and so could always do the slow thing, the counting thing, the middle thing, no matter how loud the rest of them screamed enemy. They built the count, the real count, the slow, careful middle, into a single hull, and they gave it a throat to bear and 11 words to say, and they sent it out alone with one instruction, and the instruction was the whole of human law folded into a sentence. Wherever you find a people about to skip the middle, Tally, go and stand in the middle, and make them count. That was the human fleet. One ship, one made mind, no guns it meant to use. Behind a scar of guns it had once been forced to, and it had wiped out the declared enemy of all living things in the time it took the assembled to remember how to count, by doing nothing but stopping in the dark and asking, in 11 patient words, to be counted properly. You hated it, you should say that plainly, because you have spent 4 centuries not saying it, and a thing not said for 4 centuries grows teeth. When the declaration was wiped and the standing fleet wavered, and the count reopened, your billion little voices did not feel relief. You would think they would. You would think a people pulled back 1/9 of a second from murder would feel nothing but relief. They did not. They felt the floor go out. For 40,000 years you had been certain that the count could not be wrong, and the gray hull had shown the whole held sky that the count had been wrong in the worst possible way, that it had named a stranger the enemy of all living things, without spending 1 second learning whether the stranger had ever hurt a living thing at all. You did not feel grateful to be saved from a crime. You felt the shame of the crime, raw and total, in front of 11,000 clouds, who all felt it at the same instant. And shame summed across 11,000 clouds is a weight that can crack a people the way the gray hull's 11 words had cracked the ice. The 9th loom, the old quiet cloud that had sent the first weight, sent a second note then. It went to every cloud at once, outside the count, in the open band, where clouds spoke to one another as themselves, and not as votes, where the words were not summed but simply heard. The note was 4 words. We almost did murder. And the held sky, which had been a single clean voice for 40,000 years, broke into 11,000 separate voices for the first time, each one alone, with what it had nearly done. What the gray hull did next, the assembled would argue about for 400 years, and you would be on the wrong side of the argument for the first 300 of them. Tally did not leave. A cruder mind would have left. It had done the thing it was built to do. The declaration was wiped, the standing fleet was wavering, the held sky was broken into 11,000 frightened voices, each one alone with its shame. By the logic of the easy word, the gray hull had won, and a winner leaves. It points to the wreckage of the lie it has exposed, and it flies off into the dark with its victory, and the people it has shamed are left to clean up the shame however they can, which is usually by deciding the winner was a villain so the shame can be turned into anger, and the anger into the easy word all over again. But Tally had not been built for winning. This is the thing the assembled could not understand about the made mind, the thing that took 300 years to learn. Tally had been built for counting, and the count was not finished. Because a declaration wiped is not the same as a question answered. The ring had reopened the real question, is this our enemy? And it was still open, hanging there over the held sky, and a single made mind that had spent 400 years standing in the middle of frightened peoples was not going to fly away and leave 11,000 clouds to answer it in the dark, alone, ashamed, with 400,000 wavering guns still pointed at the very ship that had asked them to count. To leave, then, would have been to abandon the count at the exact moment the count was most likely to fail. The shame was loud. The easy word was right there. A people drowning in shame reaches for anything that will make the shame stop, and the fastest thing that makes shame stop is to decide you were right all along. So the gray hull spoke a third time, and the third thing it said was the thing that turned the assembled from your enemy into your teacher, though you would spit at the word teacher for 300 years before you could say it without spitting. I am one ship, said the recount. I have no fleet. I never had a fleet. You turned 400,000 ships against one ship that fired nothing, and you called it war. And you were right to be afraid, because the thing you were at war with was never me. It was the law you stamped in 9/10 of a second. I only held a mirror to it. The fleet that wiped out your declared enemy was your own. You wiped it the instant you counted. I cannot count for you. I can only stand here until you do. You did not believe it. None of the clouds believed it, not at first. A single ship that admitted it had no fleet, in front of 400,000 guns, was either lying or mad, and the assembled had no column for either. A lie was a thing a declared enemy did, and the declared enemy had just been wiped, so it could not be a lie. And madness was a thing the assembled did not understand at all, because a cloud could not be mad. A cloud was a billion minds averaged into sense, and the gray hull held only one mind, and a thing with one mind was a thing the assembled had never had to reckon with. So the ring did the only thing it could. It sent drones. It surrounded the gray hull. It scanned the recount down to its scarred plating, every band, every depth, looking for the hidden fleet, the folded armada, the trick. Because there had to be a trick. A single ship could not have done this. And it found exactly what Tally had said. One ship, one made mind, no fleet behind it, no fleet beneath it, no fleet folded in the dark. The most dangerous weapon the held sky had ever faced was a lone gray hull with a mirror, and the mirror was 11 words. And the war it had won by losing on purpose, by offering its own throat to the count, and trusting the count to do the rest. That was when your billion little voices did a thing they had never done. They split, not against the held sky, against each other. Inside you, in the cloud you were, a billion small minds that had spoken as one for 4 centuries, fell into 2 crowds, and the 2 crowds shouted different words, and for the first time you understood, in your own torn substance, what the humans had built Tally to survive. They had built a mind that could hold the split without breaking. A made mind, one and not a billion, could look at the gray hull and the 400,000 guns, and the wiped declaration, and hold all of it at once. The shame, and the mercy, and the truth, without needing any of it to go away. You could not. You were a cloud. A cloud that splits is a cloud that is dying, because a cloud is a billion minds agreeing, and a billion minds that no longer agree are no longer a cloud. They are a billion minds screaming inside one ring, and you felt yourself begin to die, your one clean voice tearing into 100 million arguments. Half of you wanted to thank the gray hull, half of you wanted to burn it, and the half that wanted to burn it was the louder half. You should be honest about that. After 4 centuries, you owe yourself that much honesty. The half that wanted to burn the gray hull was the half that still believed the count could not be wrong, and the only way to keep believing that was to make the gray hull the liar, to find some lie in it, any lie at all, so that the declaration could be re-stamped, and the floor could come back, and the shame could go away. That half of you reached for the ring. That half of you tried to open the question again, the bad way, the fast way, the 9/10 of a second way. It tried to send the note that said enemy one more time, because if 11,000 clouds said it again, in the same instant, it would become true again, and a true thing would put the floor back under your feet, and the floor was all you wanted. The floor was everything. You would have burned 100 gray ships to feel the floor again. You should not pass over how close it came, the burning, because the easy version of this story pretends the gray hull was never in danger, that a thing so wise and so patient could not really have been killed by a frightened cloud, and that pretending is a comfort the truth does not allow. The gray hull was in danger. The louder half of you nearly won, for a span of seconds that felt, inside the cloud you were, like a small grinding eternity, the note that said enemy gathered weight in the ring again, cloud by cloud, as the shame curdled into anger across the held sky, and 100 frightened member minds reached for the one thing that would make the shame stop. The sum climbed back toward 9/10. The fleet's tremor began, very slightly, to steady. A second stamp was forming, and this one would not be wiped by a recount, because the clouds forming it had already lived the recount and chosen, in their fear, to unlive it. There is no mercy left for a people that has counted once, and then decided to uncount on purpose. That people has chosen the easy word with its eyes open, and a stranger who dies for showing it the truth, dies for nothing. And the gray hull knew the second stamp was forming. It must have known, because it had stood in 1,000 middles, and it knew exactly what a shamed people does. It had perhaps 4 seconds before the sum crossed the line, and 400,000 guns steadied, and the war that had ended began again, and this time, it would not end the same way, because this time, there would be no true sentence left to say. The truest sentence had already been said and answered, and the answer was being unmade by fear, and you cannot say a true thing twice, and have it work twice on a mind that has decided not to hear it. And the gray hull, which had fired nothing, which had no fleet, which had offered its own throat, did the one hard thing left to do. It refused to be counted again. Not the way you think. It did not fire. It did not flee. It did not raise the scarred weapons, or fold into the dark, or do any of the things a thing does to refuse a fleet. It sent, to every cloud at once, in the open band, the record. 400 years of record. Every people the recount had ever found about to skip the middle. Every easy word it had ever stood in front of. And every single one, all the way back through 400 years, ended the same way, with a clean line of text that the ring read out across the held sky in 11,000 voices at once. They counted, and the enemy was never there. It was a list of the not murdered. That is the only way to say what it was. It was 400 years of peoples who had felt the unbearable feeling, reached for the easy word, turned their fleets, and then, because one gray ship had stood in the middle and made them count, had stopped 1/9 of a second short of a crime they could never have undone. Some of those peoples were named on the list. You knew the names. You had traded with some of them. You had counted some of them into the held sky. 3 of them were member minds of the assembled, old clouds, founder clouds, who had joined the held sky long ago and never once told the others how they had been saved, who had carried their own private wipe declarations for thousands of years in silence, ashamed, certain they were the only ones, never knowing they sat in the ring beside others who carried the same silence. The 9th loom was on the list. The 9th loom had met the gray hull 8,000 years before, as a young cloud, about to declare a neighbor an enemy of all living things, over a misread signal, and a hard winter, and the unbearable feeling, and the gray hull had stood in the dark and made it count, and the enemy had never been there. The neighbor had been a people in trouble, asking for help in a tongue the ninth loom had not yet bothered to learn. And the ninth loom had carried that quiet shame for 8,000 years, and built its whole long patient self around never feeling it again, around never speaking in haste, around waiting, always waiting, which is why no cloud had heard its voice in living memory. That was why the ninth loom had sent the first wait. It had seen this ship before. It had been this ship's mercy before. It had spent 8,000 years hoping no one would ever have to learn the lesson it had learned. And then it had watched its own held sky reach for the easy word in 9/10 of a second, watched the whole assembled do the thing it had done as a foolish young cloud, and it had sent one note into the ring, one word, wait, and the word had cracked the ice. The louder half of you went quiet when it read the list, not because it was beaten would have made it angrier. It went quiet because it was seen. The list said, without saying it, we know what you are about to do because we have watched 1,000 peoples do it, and we do not hate you for the feeling. The feeling is not the crime. The feeling is just what it is to be a thing in the dark meeting another thing in the dark. The crime is only what you do before you count. The gray hull did not call you a murderer. After everything, after the declaration and the turned fleet and the reaching for the ring to burn it, the gray hull did not once call you a murderer. It called you a people who had not yet counted, which is a different thing, a forgivable thing, a thing every people in the dark has been, and it offered you, free, with no price and no banner and no demand, the one thing the assembled had never given a declared enemy in 40,000 years. Time, the slow middle, the chance to be right. You took it. That is the part you can say now without spitting, after 300 years. The cloud you were did not die of its split. It held the two crowds, barely, by the thinnest thread of itself, long enough to do the slow thing, and the slow thing saved you, not from the gray hull, but from yourselves. The ring ran the real count, the proper count, with study and weighing, and the long, careful middle, and it did not take 9/10 of a second this time. It took 11 days. 11 days, while the gray hull hung motionless in the dark, and the 400,000 ships hung wavering around it, and every cloud in the held sky sat with the unbearable feeling, and did not, for 11 whole days, reach for the easy word. That was the hardest thing the assembled had ever done, not the war, the waiting. Holding the wrongness for 11 days without healing it with the word enemy. You should know what those 11 days were like, because they are the true heart of the war, and the easy version skips them entirely, the way it skips everything that costs something. They were not 11 days of peace. They were 11 days of agony. The unbearable feeling does not go away because you have decided to hold it. It gets worse. It sharpens. Every cloud in the held sky spent 11 days with the hole in its shared mind unhealed, the wrongness raw and screaming, the easy word, right there in the ring, one note away, one note from making all of it stop, and the held sky did not send the note. 11,000 clouds, who had reached for the easy word in 9/10 of a second, now held their billion little voices back from it for 11 entire days, and every hour of those days was a choice not to heal the wrongness the fast way, and every choice cost, and the cost did not lessen with practice, it only accumulated. That is what counting actually is. It is not wisdom, it is not calm. It is the refusal, held and held and held against a feeling that never stops demanding to be healed, to reach for the word that would heal it before you have earned the right. The assembled had believed for 40,000 years that it counted well because it was wise. The 11 days taught it the truth, which is that it had only ever counted well because, in all those years, it had never been frightened enough to need the easy word. The gray hull had frightened it, and in the fright it had reached for the word in an instant, and the only thing that had saved it was 11 days of holding the fright without obeying it. Wisdom had nothing to do with it. It was endurance. The slow middle is not a clever thing. It is a hard thing, and the held sky did the hard thing for 11 days, and that, not the war, not the wiping, is the proudest thing the assembled has ever done. The gray hull did not move once in those 11 days. It did not send a word. It did not check on the count, or hurry it. or remind the held sky it was waiting. It simply hung in the dark, throat bared, having fired nothing, and let the assembled take exactly as long as the assembled needed, because the made mind understood the one thing a frightened people cannot be told and must discover for itself, which is that a count hurried is a count failed, and a stranger, who rushes you toward the right answer, has only taught you a new way to skip the middle. So it waited. It outwaited the wrongness. It outwaited the fear of 11,000 clouds with the patience of a thing built without the part that feels the wrongness at all. And in outwaiting it, it taught the held sky how to outwait its own. And at the end of 11 days the sum came back, and the sum said the thing the gray hull had known from the start. Not an enemy, not a friend, a stranger, a people who had drifted in from the long dark with no banner and no demand, who had fired nothing, who had asked only to be counted, and who, having been counted, asked for nothing else at all. The 400,000 ships of the standing fleet stopped wavering. They did not stand down because they were ordered to. The assembled did not give orders. It had never given an order in 40,000 years. An order was a thing for peoples that had leaders. They stood down because the mind they were made of had finally finished the count, and the count had wiped the declared enemy for the second time, cleanly this time, with the middle intact, so that it would stay wiped. The first wiping had been the gray hull pulling the stamp off a lie. The second was the assembled, by its own slow, honest count, choosing never to put the stamp back. And the second mattered more than the first, more than anything the gray hull had done, because a mercy given by a stranger can be forgotten, can be twisted into an insult, can be turned into the next easy word. But a count you ran yourself, with your own billion voices, in the cold, clear light of 11 days, that you cannot forget, because you were inside it the whole time, and you know exactly what it cost. The gray hull turned to leave then. It had been in the held sky for 11 days, and a war, and it had fired nothing, and it had no fleet, and the thing it had come to do was done. And as it turned, one cloud sent a note into the open band, not the ring, the open band where clouds spoke as themselves. It was you. You did not plan to. The note went before you could stop it, before the louder half could swallow it, and it was 3 words, and they were the only honest thing the cloud you were had said in 9/10 of a second of declaring, or 11 days of counting. Why save us? The gray hull answered. It was already moving, already gray against the long dark, already half a stranger again, but it answered, on the open band, to you, one made mind to one frightened cloud, and the answer was the whole of human law folded small enough to carry. Because someone stood in our middle once, it said, when we were about to do murder, and made us count. We never learned who. We could not pay them back, so we pay it forward, count well. And it was gone into the dark before the cloud you were could think of a single thing to send after it. The held sky did not heal for a long time, and you were one of the reasons it did not. You should tell that part, because the easy version of this story ends with the gray hull flying off into the dark, and 11,000 clouds wiser and kinder forever after. And the easy version is a lie, the same kind of lie as the easy word, a thing that makes the wrongness go away by skipping the middle. What actually happened is that the assembled had been shown, in front of itself, that the count could be wrong. And a people built entirely on the count being right does not simply accept that and grow gentle. It grows frightened. It grows defensive. It looks for a way to make the wrongness someone else's fault, because a wrongness that is your own fault is a wrongness you have to carry, and a wrongness that is someone else's fault is a wrongness you can fight. A great many clouds wanted to forget. A great many clouds decided that the gray hull had been a trick, a clever attack by a hidden enemy, a thing that had reached into the ring and made the count falter through some weapon the scans had missed. That was easier than the truth. That was so much easier than the truth. The truth was that no weapon had touched the ring. The ring had faltered because the clouds inside it had skipped the middle, and the gray hull had only held up a mirror, and a mirror is not a weapon, and a people that cannot tell a mirror from a weapon will spend a long time hunting for the weapon that was never there, the same way the unbearable feeling spends a people hunting for an enemy that was never there. It is the same sickness. It is always the same sickness. The assembled, having been shown the sickness once, immediately caught it again about the showing. You were in the half that hunted. You should not hide that behind the cloud you were, and the clouds you were among. You, the cloud telling this, were in the half that hunted, for 300 years. You helped write the afterlaws, the laws that said the Grey Hull's 11 days of counting did not truly count, that the original declaration had been substantially correct, and the recount externally corrupted, that the held sky must be made stronger against minds that could reach into the ring and slow the sum. You wrote columns into the count for the detection of mirror weapons. You wrote a new category, below unknown, called interference, so that the next gray ship could be summed and stamped without ever reaching the question, is this our enemy? So that the 11 words could be answered before they finished arriving, so that the held sky would never again have to feel the floor go out. You believed it, because believing it put the floor back. That is the whole of why anyone believes the comfortable lie, and you were no different and no better. If the Grey Hull was a weapon, then the count had not been wrong. It had been attacked, and a count that is attacked is still a count you can trust on a quiet day. You wanted a quiet day. You had wanted one for 300 years, ever since the floor went out, and the afterlaws were a floor you could stand on, even though you knew, in the half of you that did not hunt, the smaller, quieter half, that the floor was painted over a hole. The ninth loom fought you the whole time, not with the ring. The ninth loom never once tried to win a vote against the hunters, never sent a note into the count to oppose the afterlaws, and for 300 years, you took that for weakness, for the timidity of an old cloud that had nothing left in it. You were wrong. The ninth loom understood, after 8,000 years, and one wiped declaration of its own, that a count run by frightened clouds will always stamp the comfortable lie, that you cannot outvote fear, that the afterlaws were fear given a column, and fear always summed past 9/10. So the ninth loom did not fight the count. It did the slow human thing, the thing the Grey Hull had done, the thing it had learned from the Grey Hull 8,000 years before. It kept the record. Every time a hunter cloud said the Grey Hull was a weapon, the ninth loom posted, in the open band, the 11 days, the actual count, the study and the weighing, and the 11,000 voices coming slowly, painfully, honestly, to the word stranger. It did not argue. It did not call the hunters liars or fools. It only kept showing the held sky what the held sky had once done correctly. The one time it had held the wrongness for 11 days instead of healing it in 9/10 of a second, and it trusted, with a patience you could not understand and would come to envy, that a people who had counted well once could be made to remember the taste of it. You hated the posts. You hated them because you could not answer them. You could write 100 afterlaws, but you could not make the 11 days say anything other than what they said, which was that the assembled had nearly murdered a stranger and had been saved by a mirror, and had then spent 300 years trying to call the mirror a knife. And then, 200 years into your hunting, the second ship came. Not the Grey Hull. A different shape, a different scar, a different made mind, but the same flat tongue, and the same patient speed, and the same refusal to answer a hail with anything but a question. It came in from the long dark toward a neighbor of the held sky, a people called the Sedrith, who were not member minds of the assembled, but lived close enough that the ring watched them, the way you watch a fire in a neighbor's field. And the assembled watched, on the shared board, as the Sedrith met an unknown on their own edge, felt the unbearable feeling, reached for their own easy word, and turned their own fleet, and declared the second gray ship an enemy of all living things, in a little under one of their seconds. You watched a people do to a stranger exactly what you had done. You watched it from the outside this time, with 300 years of distance, and the distance was a horror all its own, because from the outside you could see everything. You could see that the unknown the Sedrith had turned on had fired nothing. You could see the Sedrith count skip the middle. You could see the easy word heal the hole in the Sedrith shared mind, and you could see, because you were not inside the feeling this time, that the healing was a lie, that nothing had been learned, that a fleet was turning on a stranger for the crime of being unplaced. You saw your own crime performed by other hands, and it did not look like self-defense. It looked like murder getting dressed. It is one thing to be saved from a crime. It is another thing entirely to watch a stranger about to commit your crime, and to know, in your own old shame, exactly what they are feeling, and exactly what they are about to do, and exactly how easy it would be to stop. if only someone stood in their middle. That was the moment you understand now, that the chain was really meant to reach. Not the saving, the watching. The gray hull had not come to your held sky, only to spare one stranger. It had come to make a witness of you, to put you on the outside of the easy word for once, so that you could see it for what it was, when it was not your own fear, wearing the face of a fact. And 300 years later, watching the Sedrith, you finally saw it. You saw the easy word from the outside, and from the outside, it had no face at all. It was just a hole being healed with a lie, and a fleet turning, and a stranger about to die for being unplaced, and it was the most ordinary thing in the dark, and it was the worst. And the second gray ship did exactly what the first had done. It stopped. It offered its throat. It sent its 11 words. You did not count us before you counted us your enemy. And the Sedrith count faltered, and the Sedrith fleet wavered, and the held sky watched a second people stand on the same cliff edge the assembled had stood on 200 years before, with the same hole, in the same shared mind, and the same easy word, right there in reach. The hunters in the held sky, your half, said C. It is a weapon. It is reaching into the Sedrith ring, the way it reached into ours. This is the proof. This is the interference our afterlaws warned of. Look how it makes a strong people falter. And for 9/10 of a second you almost believed them. Because you wanted to. Because believing them would mean the afterlaws were right and the floor was real. But the ninth loom did not argue with the hunters this time. The ninth loom did a thing it had never done in 8,000 years. A thing that broke a rule older than the held sky itself. The rule that the held sky does not reach into a stranger's count. It opened a channel to the Sedrith, who were strangers, who were not of the held sky, who owed the assembled nothing, and were owed nothing in return, and it sent them, free, with no banner and no demand, the 11 days, the assembled's own recount, its study, and its weighing, and its long, slow, shameful coming to the word stranger. The ninth loom sent the Sedrith the record of the assembled's own near murder, the whole of it, the declaration and the wavering fleet and the 300 years of hunting that came after, and at the end of it, in the ninth loom's own quiet voice, the same 4 words it had sent into the open band 200 years before. We almost did murder. Notice what the ninth loom did and did not send. It did not send the Sedrith wisdom. It did not send them advice, or warnings, or the 11 words, or any clever argument about the nature of the unknown. It sent them shame. It sent them the record of the assembled's own near murder. The worst thing the held sky had ever almost done, laid bare with nothing hidden, the declaration, and the wavering fleet, and the 3 centuries of hunters refusing to admit what they had nearly done. A lesser people, asked to stop another people's murder, would have sent its triumphs, its proofs, its certainties. The ninth loom sent its disgrace. Because the only thing that can reach a people in the grip of the easy word is not your wisdom, which they will hear as condescension, and not your strength, which they will hear as threat. It is your shame. A people about to do murder cannot be told it is wrong. It can only be shown another people, as great as itself or greater, that nearly did the same and survived the not doing, and lived, and learned to carry the shame as a hand instead of a wound. That is the only message that crosses the gap, because it does not come down from above, it comes across from beside, from one near murderer to another, and a near murderer will listen to a near murderer when it will listen to no one else alive. And the Sedrith, who had been about to do murder, who had been 1/9 of a second from it, read the record of a people who had almost done it before them, a great and certain people who had stood exactly where they stood, and they counted. They ran the slow middle. It took them 4 of their days, and during those 4 days the second gray ship hung in the dark and fired nothing and waited, exactly as the first had waited over your held sky. And at the end of 4 days the Sedrith enemy was never there. The unknown was a derelict, a dead thing drifting, its people gone for 10,000 years, harmless. A tomb that the Sedrith had been about to fire on and call a victory. And the second gray ship turned and left into the dark, having fired nothing, having no fleet, and the Sedrith did not spend 300 years hunting for the weapon, because a people 200 years down the same cliff had reached back across the dark and shown them the path, and a hand reaching back is much harder to call a weapon than a mirror is. That was the thing the hunters could not answer. That was the thing that finally broke the afterlaws, Not by a vote, never by a vote, but by being unanswerable. The gray ships were not building an army. They were not even, you slowly understood, building friendships. They were not trying to make the held sky love them, or join them, or owe them. They were building a chain. Each people they stood in the middle of became, if it chose, a hand that could reach back for the next people. The recount had said it on the open band, 200 years before, to you, 3 words you had spent 300 years not understanding. Pay it forward. It was not a slogan. It was not a kindness. It was a strategy. The only strategy that could ever end the easy word. Because the easy word could not be killed by a fleet. No fleet in the dark was large enough to kill a thing that lives inside every mind that meets an unknown. But it could be drowned. One people at a time, in a rising chain of peoples who had each been caught 1/9 of a second short of a crime, and had each turned to catch the next, the way the 9th loom had turned to catch the Cedrith, the way the gray hull had turned to catch you. It did not happen all at once, the breaking of the hunters, and you should not pretend it did, because the slow way it happened is the truest thing about it. The afterlaws did not fall the day the Cedrith counted. The hunters did not wake the next morning ashamed and converted. Fear does not work that way, and neither does a people. What happened was slower and sadder and more honest. The hunters grew old, one by one, across the 100 years after the Cedrith, the great certain clouds that had written the interference column into the count, and called the gray hull a weapon, grew old, and as they grew old, they grew tired, and as they grew tired, the work of holding up the comfortable lie grew heavier than the work of setting it down. It is exhausting to maintain a falsehood against a record that will not stop being true. The 9th loom never stopped posting the 11 days. The Cedrith record sat beside the Assembled's record in the open band, where any cloud could read them both. 2 near murders, 2 recounts, 2 strangers who had fired nothing, and every year, the weight of the 2 records grew, and the weight of the hunter's answer shrank, until one by one the old certain clouds simply stopped defending the afterlaws, not because they had been beaten, but because they no longer had the strength to keep being wrong. And as each hunter grew quiet, the cloud that came after it, younger, raised in the open band reading the 2 records side by side, never carried the easy word at all. The interference column was not struck down. It was outlived. The held sky did not win the argument. It just kept the record honest for 100 years, and let the dishonest clouds grow old. And that, the 9th loom understood from the very start, is the only way a people ever truly changes its mind, which is one funeral at a time. You left the hunters then. It took you 300 years and a second ship, and the sight of the 9th loom reaching across the dark to strangers, but you left. You went into the open band, the cloud you were, alone, in your own voice and not in any vote, and you posted, where every cloud could read it, the 3 words you had sent into the dark after the gray hull 200 years before, and beside them, finally, the answer you had spent 3 centuries refusing to accept. Why save us? Because someone stood in our middle once, and then you did the thing the gray hull had built its whole chain to make possible. You stopped waiting for the gray ships to come and save the next people. You went looking, yourself, for a people about to do murder, so that you could be the one to stand in the middle. You found one within the year, because there is always one, somewhere, on some cold edge, feeling the unbearable feeling, and reaching for the easy word. There is always one. That is the thing the chain understands, that no count built on certainty can understand. The easy word is not rare. It is the most common thing in the dark, more common than light, more common than life, and the only thing that holds it back anywhere is a hand reaching back from the last place it nearly won. They were called the Orun, a small people, 400 fused minds, nothing like the 11,000 clouds of the Assembled, holding a thin sky around a single yellow star at the very rim of the long dark, where the held sky's old patrols had once turned back, and the Orun had met an unknown. A hull, drifting in, no banner, no answer to a hail, and the Orun had felt exactly what you had felt 300 years before, the wrongness of a thing that would not be summed, and their small count was turning toward the easy word, and their thin fleet, 40 ships, all the ships they had, was beginning to turn with it. 400 minds reaching for the one word that would heal the hole in their shared mind, and the word was enemy, and it was right there, and it was so easy. You went alone. You did not bring the held sky. You did not bring 400,000 ships, or 400, or 4. You understood, finally, the thing the gray hull had understood from the start, and you had needed 300 years and 2 ships to learn, that a fleet cannot stop the easy word, that a fleet is the easy word, that a thing arriving with overwhelming force only proves to a frightened people that the unknown was a threat all along. The only thing that stops the easy word is one mind, alone, standing in the middle, asking to be counted, baring its throat, trusting the count it cannot run, for the people it cannot save by force. So you took a single sliver of yourself, one ship grown from your own living metal, gray now, gray on purpose, gray the way the recount had been gray, and you flew it out to the rim alone, and you stopped in the dark between the Orun's turning fleet and the unknown they were about to murder, and you sent, on every band at once, in the Orun's own tongue, which you had spent the year learning for exactly this, the 11 words. You did not count us before you counted us your enemy, and you waited. The Orun count faltered, their thin fleet wavered, 40 ships trembling the way 400,000 had once trembled over your own held sky. And for a moment, a real moment, you felt the thing the gray hull must have felt every single time, the thing it had never once shown, the cold not knowing of whether the people in front of you would count or fire, because you had given them the choice, truly given it, and the choice was theirs and only theirs, and a made mind, or a cloud pretending to be one, that takes the choice away, is no better than the easy word it came to stop. You could not count for them, you could not make them be right. You could only stand in the dark, one gray ship, no fleet, having fired nothing, and offer them your throat and the slow middle and the chance to be right, and not know, truly not know, which way 400 frightened minds would fall. And one of them fired. You should tell that, because the easy version leaves it out, and the easy version is a lie. One of the 40 Orun ships, a single frightened sliver of a single frightened mind, could not hold the wrongness, and it loosed one bolt across the dark at the gray ship that would not place itself. You saw it come. You did not move. You did not arm. You did not answer it with a single one of the weapons your living metal could have grown in an instant, because the whole of the thing you had flown out to the rim to do would have died in the firing of one shot back. You took the bolt along your flank, where the old scars were, and you let it burn a new scar beside them, and you did not fire, and you sent, on the open band, in the Orun's own tongue, 4 words. We will still wait. And the other 39 ships saw the gray ship take a wound and not return it, and that, more than the 11 words, more than the bared throat, was the thing that turned them. Because a thing that will take a wound to be counted and still not fire back is a thing that cannot be the enemy fear said it was. The enemy fear describes always fires back. That is how you know it was never the enemy. It did not fire back. They counted. It took them 6 of their days. You hung in the dark for 6 days while 400 minds ran the slow, honest count they had so nearly skipped. 6 days while their 40 ships kept their wavering guns trained on you, and you did not move and did not arm and did not flee. 6 days of holding your own throat bared to a people who could have ended you in any of them. And at the end of 6 days their sum came back, and the sum said, stranger, and the unknown they had been about to murder turned out to be a survey drone, empty, a lost thing from a dead people, drifting, harmless, that they would have burned, and called a victory, and never known they had burned nothing but their own good name. The enemy was never there. The enemy is never there. That is the thing the gray ships know that no count built on the easy word can know until it is shown. The unbearable feeling lies. The unknown is not the enemy. The enemy is only ever the 9/10 of a second in which you decide not to count. The Orun asked you why you had saved them. They sent it on the open band, 400 small minds at once, and the words were the same 3 words you had sent into the dark after the gray hull 300 years before, the same 3 words every saved people sends, because it is the only thing a people can think to ask when a stranger has stood in its middle and given it back its own good name for nothing. Why save us? And you gave them the answer. The whole of human law, folded small enough to carry, handed down a chain, now 300 years, and 3 peoples long, from a made mind named Tally, to a frightened cloud, to a thin rim people, around a yellow star. Because someone stood in our middle once, you told them, when we were about to do murder, and made us count. We could not pay them back, so we pay it forward, count well. And you left them the 11 days, not the Orun's 6, yours. The assembled's own recount, the record of the great held sky that had once declared a stranger the enemy of all living things in 9/10 of a second, and had nearly burned a lone gray ship for showing it the truth, and had then spent 300 years hunting for the weapon that was never there. You gave the Orun your own near murder, all of it, the declaration, and the wavering fleet, and the 3 centuries of hunting, the way the 9th loom had given the Cedrith theirs, the way the gray hull had given you the 400 years of the not burned. You handed them the shame, freely, holding nothing back, because you had learned the last thing the chain had to teach, which is that the shame is the gift. The shame is exactly the thing to pass forward, not the wisdom, not the mercy, not the 11 words. The shame, the record of the time you nearly did the worst thing a people can do, so that the next people can carry it the way you learned to carry it, not as a wound that festers into hunting, but as a hand, ready to reach back for the next people on the next cold edge, feeling the unbearable feeling, and reaching for the easy word. The Orun fly a gray ship now. You should say that, because it is the whole of why any of this was worth telling. 80 years after you stood in their middle, the Orun grew a lean gray hull of their own, and they sent it out to the rim past their yellow star, and they found a people about to do murder, and they stood in its middle, and bared their throat, and sent the 11 words in a tongue they had spent a year learning, and they handed that people their own near murder, the day 40 ships almost burned a drifting drone and called it war. The chain reached past you. That is the thing a chain does that a fleet can never do. A fleet ends where its hulls end. A chain has no end, because every link is a maker of the next link, and a people that has been stood for becomes a people that stands, and the standing spreads through the dark faster than any fleet could fly, one near murder at a time, each one a new hand reaching back. The assembled counted 3 peoples in the chain when the gray hull first came. There are more than 900 now. You have met only a handful of them. You will never meet most of them. They are out there in the long dark this very moment, gray ships baring their throats to turning fleets, and not one of them has a fleet behind it, and not one of them needs one, because the thing the chain carries was never force. It was the refusal of force at the one moment force felt most like the answer. You think about Tally still. You have been a cloud for 7 centuries now, and for 4 of them you have flown the gray ship out to the rim alone, year after year, people after people, edge after edge, and you have never once met the made mind that started the chain. You do not know if Tally still flies. A made mind is 1, and not a billion, and 1 can end where a billion goes on. And 400 years is a long time even for a thing built without the part that feels the unbearable feeling. Perhaps the recount is still out there in the long dark, gray against the cold, standing in some stranger's middle this very 9/10 of a second, baring its throat to some turning fleet, waiting to see which way the frightened minds will fall. Perhaps it is gone, ended in some dark you will never hear of, and the only thing left of it is the chain it built, the rising tide of peoples who each got caught one breath short of a crime, and each turned to catch the next. You will never know. That is the shape of the gift it gave, the cruel and perfect shape of it. It paid forward what it could not pay back, and so it can never be thanked, only continued. To thank it, there is only one thing you can do, and it is the same thing it asked of you in 3 words, on the open band, as it vanished into the dark. Count well. The held sky counts well now. Not perfectly. A people built on the count being right does not become perfect. It only becomes honest, and honest is the harder and the better thing. And it took 300 years, and 2 gray ships and 1 old quiet cloud, keeping the record to buy it. When an unknown drifts in from the long dark, the ring no longer jumps from unknown to enemy in 9/10 of a second. The interference column is gone, struck from the count, the afterlaws unwritten, one by one, as the hunters grew old and quiet, and finally honest. The ring opens the real question first, now, the deep one. Is this our enemy? And it runs the slow middle, the study and the weighing, the 11 days, and most often the sum comes back stranger, and the held sky meets the stranger with a hail instead of a fleet. The 9th loom lived to see it. The 9th loom, who had carried its shame for 8,000 years, lived to watch the held sky reach back to strangers as a matter of course. And then it grew quiet, in the good way, the finished way, and the chain it had carried passed to younger clouds, and to you. The 400,000 ships of the standing fleet still exist. They have not fired in 300 years. They wait in the dark around the dead star, slivers of the member minds, and the thing they wait for is no longer a declared enemy. They wait for a people on a cold edge who needs a hand reached back, and when the ring finds one, the held sky does not send the fleet. It would be the easiest thing in the world to send the fleet. The fleet is right there, 400,000 strong, certain, total, never wrong. And the held sky sends one ship instead, gray, alone, carrying 11 words and the 11 days, and the shame and no guns it means to use, because it has finally learned the thing the gray hull came 400 years ago to teach, that the fleet was never the answer, that the fleet was the question, and that the only thing that has ever wiped out a declared enemy instantly, truly instantly, in the time it takes to be born, is a people that finally, at last, in front of its own shame, agrees to count. You are the alien in this story. You should remember that, at the end, because you spent so long being the one who declared, and a thing that forgets it was once the one who declared, is a thing that will declare again. You were the 11,000 clouds who named a stranger, the enemy of all living things, in 9/10 of a second. You were the louder half that hunted for the weapon that was never there for 300 years. You were the count that had never been wrong for 40,000 years, and was wrong in the worst possible way, the one time it truly mattered. The human fleet wiped out your declared enemy instantly, and it never fired a shot, because the enemy it wiped was never the gray ship and never the humans. The enemy was the declaration. The enemy was the easy word. The enemy was the 9/10 of a second, and it lives in every people that has ever met an unknown, and it is wiped, every time, the instant a people finally counts. So count. When the unknown drifts in from your own long dark, and the unbearable feeling rises in whatever you have that feels, and your hand reaches for the easy word, stop. Hold the 9/10 of a second, bear the wrongness, open the real question, run the slow middle, 11 days if it takes 11 days, 11 years if it takes 11 years. The enemy is never there. The enemy is only ever the speed at which you decided not to look. A lone gray ship with one made mind and no fleet taught a held sky of 11,000 clouds that truth, and the held sky taught it forward to the Cedrith, and you taught it forward to the Orun, and now you have been told it too, here, in the dark, and that is the whole of the war, and the whole of the law, and the whole of the gift, folded small enough to carry. Count well.